Okay, I guess I want to talk about, I guess, three things that Gary's bringing up, or a few things, are the notion of truth, I guess in general, um, the age-old argument of tree falls in the woods, doesn't make a sound, whether or not that's true, and vegetarianism. And I guess those are the things he wants me to address. Um, wow. Okay. What to say about him? Hope you don't mind. I'm going to do this with my eyes closed, at least for the most part. Okay. Truth. First of all, I was arguing that truth, not necessarily that truth is relative, but that there are different types of truth. There's, I mean, if you Google types of truth, you get people dissecting it into numerical types. There's four of them and there's five of them, and it's kind of like one of the things I oppose is the notion that people can divide things up into necessarily true quantities. Kind of like Anton at one time was saying, well, according to this particular author, there are three types of um, words, like indexical and symbolic and iconic, as if to reduce the way in which, the perspective in which one looks at the world into necessarily only those components. And, someone might come back and challenge someone else, well, then name another one, and I might say, oh, well, how about I complicate it and say a symbolic type of language, which would mean kind of like an attribution of meaning um, to an idea where one takes the symbol. Someone uses the tortoise and the hare and references the rabbit. First the tortoise and the hare function. The hare functions as a metaphor for approaching things speedily and erratically. And so it's a narrative or figurative symbol, but then the rabbit can also take on a role of fertility, a sign of fertility, and it might even take on an ultra symbolic meaning. So it's the symbol of symbol, or symbol squared, would function as a kind of a multiple layering, multiple layering of symbol upon symbol, as opposed to just saying there's a static symbol. Now, the only reason I bring this up is because of ending that by saying a static symbol, a standardization. It's really easy for people to, feel like, the world is a sphere, but I can say that it's flat metaphorically, and that science is trying to flatten the playing field. It's trying to say, look, we're going to test for truth, right? Kind of like the way science found out that eggs cause, cholesterol to occur in the veins, and then later on it found the truth was that it didn't, and so it found these different end results, and so it's like the data keeps changing or improving or becoming more variant. But the idea of truth is that there is something to trust, something to lean on, something to believe in, something that is based on agreement. And so types of truth, one of them is agreement. Well, a bunch of people agree. Science is peer-reviewed. Cold fission was the case until it was peer-reviewed, and then it wasn't. And now it's, are there bacteria fossils coming in from outer space? And it's refuted. And so much of what we call truth is truth on agreement now. In mathematics and logic, in order to even come close to truth, you have to believe in the standardization and the convention of the reed. You have to know what is standard, and you have to know how to read things in a proper manner. And so basically, I'm just saying that there's multiple types of truth. Yeah, like a priori truth, universal truth, social truth, truth upon agreement, and I'm certain that there's other types of truth. But okay, and so truth in general. Yeah, I'm not trying to make a relativistic argument, but I'm not trying to exclude relativism either, because I think a lot of people are they're trying to find uniform. They're trying to bond with something uniform, and it makes them comfortable. And I think let's see. Okay, so I argued for operatic versus apodictic truth, and then indeterminism, truth, or the underscoring of something that's truth, getting to something by not getting to it. Parallel lines will never meet, but if you bend them down, if you look at them from a perspective, you can't help but see them as meeting, right? They become a single point from a certain perspective. But nevertheless, there's this notion that that the world, can be made flat, so to speak, through science. So we can all get on the same platform and call that truth and trust it. Well, a phantasm, as I see it, as I put it forward some year and a half ago, is the notion of something that appears that might appear once, and therefore it's untestable, so science can't get its arm around it. Yet it's still claimed from evidence or testimony, types of truth, a truth upon, an individual truth. People's claims of God, based either on the way they interact with symbols and absences, the way they interact with the universe of consideration, considering things in multiple dimensions, considering them in all sorts of different possibilities, so forth. So I guess I'm waxing, but I'm going to try to get to some points here. So truth, let's see, kind of like this. Okay. So the tree falls in the wood idea. I want to say, let's talk about something happening, and then let's talk about the limits of sense in which one frames the very question of what one is talking about, right? And so I want to say that there's a limit, and then I want to say that it's limitless, right? And this might appear for all, I guess, irrational considerations. I'm not going to be around, to test every tree cracking, and I'm not going to sit here and deny the physics. If a tree cracked and it didn't make a vibration, I would say the absence was a phantasm, right? And so it's not about that, I'm not going to consider the bottom of every car and place everything in a proposition, but I'll say that the mere fact that I'm talking about the bottom of a car allows one to image the idea. I'm conveying the concept, a proposition. A 3D model of that can be produced now. Our mind can imagine it. You can say it without imaging it and still understand the concept of a preposition. I should say preposition, not proposition. And so my point is that, I'm comparing the idea of a planet orbiting a star as opposed to a tree falling in the woods making sound. We want to say if physics happen here, same laws of physics happen across the galaxy. There's not a limit to them, right? And so we say since it can happen, whether it's here being tested, it applies over there, and then we're going to find truth. The same thing happens in time physics. If it happened in time here, then it's going to happen in time in the future, right? And then you get arguments that say, oh, well, the definition of physics changed in a black hole or at the beginning of time, and then people are arguing, well, is there time before space and time, or are we going to call that God, or this and that on some extremity? And so all I'm suggesting is that my narrative was suggesting that the absenting all possible perspectives for figure-ground relationship to basically make a distinction between a thing, what it's equated to, and what its background is, right? To say that it's the language of demarcation points in the language that we already accept as significant. Tree is an item, and so we say we know what the tree is, and then there's the relationship, the preposition to the tree, and then there's what the tree is doing, right? It's cracking, and then there's the effect of that. There's the vibration, right? So we don't disagree with that, but what I'm getting at is that kind of like in Korean, annyeonghi kiseo versus annyeonghi kaseo is whether or not someone's leaving or whether or not someone's staying. In Russian, there's a color for light blue, a word for light blue that's really oftenly used, as opposed to dark blues, where we might say, sky blue or ultramarine blue. We might dissect it more. I mean, it's like a color wheel. Color wheels can be dissected into, yellow, red, and blue, or you can add a green in, or you can then have, my computer's like, oh, it has 60 million colors. Oh, just 60 million. Okay, well, some languages parse, the way they parse and make demarcation points are significant. And so what I'm suggesting, kind of like if someone says sun, right? Like an ontological view, oh, well, sun, sun produces heat on the planets, the photons, the light. Like, we are part of the sun. Like, the sun already engulfs us, right? Because we're on the planet. Every daylight, we are part of the photons. Oh, well, wait, no, the argument isn't there. The sun is not what the sun emits. The sun is what the sun is, and that is limited to just its burning gas. It's almost where its own gravity falls back, and we want to say, oh, that's the line of what the sun is, but all the photons, all the light, anything it's emitting, we're not going to say that's the sun. That's the product of the sun. So we're already making a parser distinction. But what I'm trying to suggest is that after language, right, if you don't have a population of language to maintain demarcation points, to maintain figure-background relationships, then the notion of vibration versus non-vibration, it's kind of like sounds in space, what is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? What is the sound of a gun going off in space, right? There's not a medium for that to happen, right? And so this notion of post-supernova, like no more trees, right? Like excluding, first of all, it presses the idea of substituting either infinite universes, therefore there are other planets with other trees on it, or it implies an alien perspective or a God perspective. And I've already heard Gary mention, well, the Drake equation, and I happen to agree, does not prove that there's any other life. It doesn't improve the probability or possibility. It can always just be zero, just be one. There's only one planet. It's just us. It's just us. Okay, so if we take that idea and we're in denial of transcendental God or any interdimensional aliens or any aliens, as sentient beings, then and that's kind of the premise. It's the post-consciousness demarcations. There's no lingual demarcations to say whether or not this is dark blue or light blue, to say whether or not there's an atmosphere in order for there to be vibration. Like the sun's photons on the lowest frequency are functioning as a vibration, or one could say there's vibration there, but they're not sound. They go beyond sound, so what we call sound is not there. And so my whole notion is that to not have an agreed platform, a truth upon agreement, a truth upon cultural description, to go beyond that, we can't make a distinction between what a planet orbiting a sun is, right? It's almost like you have to accept what we have right now. You have to accept the forecasted image of the physics right now. But we know that language and considerations change, kind of like with the, does an egg cause cholesterol in the system? Or are we going to call the Earth a sphere? Or are we going to call it a spiral, right? I can say, well, it's true that the Earth is a sphere, and it's true that it's a spiral, in the same way that I would argue, well, a thing, a person is not only what they think or what they know, they're also what they do, right? Do they go beyond that? And so my point is that in 3 dimensions, the Earth is we traditionally call it a sphere, but in 4 dimensions, you notice that it's what it does, and it's a spiral, right? It's the demarcation of saying, in the tradition of saying, no, look at it this way. So it's kind of like, well, in 1100 AD, was the Earth flat? And one answer is, well, yes, because the culture could not have considered it any other way. And I'm not trying to refute, a historical take on that, where people go, oh, no, well, it's not really the case. I'm simply suggesting that the culture limits the demarcation lines, language delimits the demarcation lines. And this was in conjunction with this notion of how do we successfully escape anthrocentrism. And so what I was doing is I was using as opposed to the tree, I was using the planet orbiting the planet, talking about post-consciousness, because what was being quote-unquote smuggled in the back door was a alien point of view or a God's eye point of view. Right? Now, if you want to suggest that physics and these demarcation points, that a sun is limited to everything other than its expression, and therefore does not already encompass what it is that we want to say is orbiting, and if you want to say that the planet orbiting is not already defined by the orbit, it's not already spiralic, then what I'm saying is the very root of the demarcation and the definition. If you don't have a public, if you don't have a population to consider it, to define it, to point to it, if you no longer have a sign to signify, right? You only have it present tense that can forecast future, but you don't have it, you don't have it post then the notion that that an item does something, or that an item is something, becomes absurd. I mean, we're already taking a concept and superseding it, and you want to combat the idea of whether or not a concept supersedes physics. Well, my question is, well, when does it? I mean, even this conversation, I'm just going, wah, wah, wah. I mean, I'm just a mal, barking. And so you're going to listen to the whole idea and then hopefully parse it out the way you'll parse it out, and you'll you'll want to maintain some ground. And so the whole idea is make certain that you fixate, you subsume, you assume that we're on the same playing field, right, based on what it is I'm saying, based on what it is you think everyone else should be considering, and then go from there, right? Okay, and so what I'm saying, though, is that all of this is a practice that we have, right? And that I was using the anthropomorphic, the successful escape of anthropomorphism, to be kind of like, there's nothing to equate that one, kind of like irrational or imaginary numbers, there's something that can be done with them, but it's not something, uh, like, how to say, practical, right? It's more like it's only going to function as a logic process, right? It's going to function as a variable in logic. It doesn't really balance with anything else. You can't say the square root of -1 equals something else, and it's gonna function as a variable in order to computate something, right? But it's not the same way as saying, 1 plus 2 equals, um, 5 minus 2, right? It's not the same thing as balance. How equations balance things. The is, everyone has an is statement that they're putting out as truth, right? Where the whole goal is you can either repeat it, a thing is a thing, a fact is a fact, blah blah blah, bing da bang, and as soon as you get to bing da bang and you realize how bing and bang are different and they're equated, then that's where people start with this notion of truth. Anyway, and so I was also, and I don't know whether or not I'm successful at trying to talk about how anthropomorphism, or to escape anthropomorphism, is successful, other than that the sign can point to things outside, right? Kind of like pointing to the future, right? You can't be there to test it, so all we're left with is being in this language pointing to the future, right? So there is no signified to the sign, right? And kind of this idea of pointing outside of language and trying to say, the autobiography of a dog requires, a knowledge that the dog isn't writing, but it's this notion that one is making an identification beyond sympathy, beyond empathy, right? Kind of like my relationship to the pain of childbirth. I can't have an empathy to it, and it's weird to even say I have a sympathy to that particular process, but it doesn't mean that I can't talk about how it is I know it, right? But then to have, the perspective of an animal, to say, well, a mare giving birth and a woman giving birth are sharing something, and there might even be an interspecial empathy going on from the horse to the human, from an animal to us, right? Where we really feel like we're sharing a lot of common things with one another, common events. Yeah, and so this notion of identifying with an animal, or identifying with something beyond, and getting feedback from it. It's what was claimed as monamic. It's a one-sided relationship, kind of like the cloud informs you that it's going to rain, right? And back to distinctions, it's almost like what's in a name, right? Now, my name is Mike when I'm indoors, but when I'm outdoors, it's Michael, right? And how do I know that? Because it's traditional. When I'm outside, my parents had to yell in two syllables for me to know that they were talking about me. Otherwise, it kind of sounded the same as somebody else. And so, but when I'm in closer proximity, indoors, Mike just it does the job, right? So I'm two different people based on my preposition, my relationship, my demarcation point. I'm opening this up as a possible dialogue. And so what I'm suggesting, though, is that kind of like the same way that you can't get feedback from a gnat, but you can identify with the gnat. You can put yourself in that idea, what was put forth as the pathos, right? And then, or even to identify with any other individual, as opposed to taking a solipsistic approach and realizing you're part of a community, but you'll never meet so many of these people that are in so many different circumstances. You can identify with them as much as you subsume some common base, right? Without that, though, with even the forecast to the future, it's interesting that you would use the Drake equation and still limit the answer to 1, but want to talk about the truth beyond having a signified, a future tense or an otherly tense of truth, without taking on this notion that the universe would be parsed in this particular way, right? That a thing is what it's called, the naming process by something that can't name things, post-consciousness. It can't relate to anything because there's not a word to relate. So it's not doing anything, and it doesn't have a relationship to its background, because those are human demarcation points. Those are things that we've laid on there, right? And so it's assuming a positioning of another consciousness in there in order to relate to it. And that's kind of the same thing that's happening with the tree falls in the woods, right? But the thing is we want to point to trees. We can point to trees and say that's what's happening. But as soon as we start talking about planets and satellites controlling our phone, I don't see the satellite, but I know it's there. Kind of like I know that planets orbit stars because we're told that, because we can measure that. But I'm not a scientist. I'm not doing it, so I'm already accepting whole platforms of knowledge based on other people's science, right? And why shouldn't I, But that's like truth upon trust. Oh, now I have to trust somebody. I don't have to trust them. I have to agree on it, right? And so, okay, so that's where I'm going at with those things, and so I'm saying it's twofold. It's twofold, right? The truth is twofold. In the first place, it's kind of a determined grounding that we agree upon. Upon the second pass, the second fold, we're going to underscore it. What's the difference between the pointing to it, the operatic, the apodetic, and the sign hitting the signified, as opposed to the operatic, the underscoring, the roundabout, the doubtful, the indeterminate notion, right? So you got truism, you just kind of accept truth, and then you get this underscoring, this kind of not certain, kind of this vagueness of typing, right? So the whole notion of finding these truths is kind of this uniformity. You're trying to find something that's uniform, right? I'm on a quest to find uniform, and it's almost like a lot of atheists, a lot of people that are anti-religious, non-religious, they don't like the ever-growing expansive policy making of the uniformity of religions, what religions are putting forth in as far as and even science. I don't like the march of science because it seems like its expression is technology, and I don't necessarily want our planet to turn into whatever my notions or anti-sympathies are of a Borg planet. Everyone wired and knowledge becoming transparent and change occurring, which can be so depressive because a lot of the assumed cultural naturalism that we've inherited is being stripped away, and it's being replaced with new technologies on the march of science. So I'm not here to bum hump science and hoop it up any more than I'm here to get in line with religious folks on everything. And yet it's as if the world is attempting to monetize things instead of seeing the value of the multiplicity of things. Okay, so bing, real time. It's about 30 minutes 8 seconds of babble just to get to there. Now, as far as vegetarianism and suffering, you got on, Gary, and you took one guy and you really pointed out, because a lot of times I hear what you're saying and I like it. And I try to give my history a little bit, going up to Bellingham. And I used to be vegan. I used to only eat rice. I've even heard of breatharians, right? So I can take the science, right, which is already kind of the egg thing, kind of the cold fusion thing, kind of the peer review thing, kind of the indeterminateness, trying to become determined, and I'm bringing in a pseudoscience, the empathy. Let me bring in an empathizing with plants and actually say, oh, someone measured it. Although and I even did a search trying to find where somebody had come up with this significantly measurable test. But even if they find something significantly measurable within plants, there's a lot of assumption about what the plant's going through, and kind of trying to anthropomorphize the plant and to say, well, the plant is feeling, and then it's feeling pain, as opposed to just saying this is what's happening, right? Now, okay, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to stick to topic. Okay, so as far as vegetarianism, yeah, on one end of the spectrum, there's the whole plant thing. Like it's this notion, like you said, of cannibalism. It's like, okay, you've landed your statements about what is the case, right? And that one of these things, we're a molecule, a replicating molecule, the DNA molecule, and what is it? Addiction, reproduction, cannibalism, right? So if we assume your premises, then there's kind of this cannibalism that goes on, right? And then you can think of Hannibal the Cannibal, and they show that movie, and it implies that this group of guys that are eating his sister, including him, for survival. If you're left on a raft, whether or not it's with a dead chicken, you got a piece of chicken, you got an apple, and you got your neighbor, who you know, and you have this stray dog who you've never met, right? And you're all on a raft, and you're already drinking salt water to death, but it's like, is it all just going to perish and die because it's the right thing to do, or is the cannibalism going to take effect? Are you going to eat the chicken, the animal? It's like, okay, so you're going to say, well, the dog might eat the chicken, and that's all right because it doesn't know better, right? But humans know better, and so there's this notion of what is right? This notion of truth, number one, that you think humans, because we're capable of doing so many things, should buy into that which is right? And then there's the disregarding, the previous assumed soft sciences that are suggesting that humans ate, because of teeth, or because we do eat them, digestion and so forth, that we do eat meat historically. So there's this denial that it needs to happen, kind of like circumcision, right? We don't have to circumcise because there's this old notion of what cleanliness was, but really this had to do more with, like, I mean, I don't know. I'm just going to throw out the idea that you sting a child on its dick to make certain that it's, that it's marked, that the progeny is marked, or maybe a more on a personalized, subjective level, that's one of the first sensations that a male child should know is the sting of its pecker, so he knows what to not go fucking with, something to that effect. I don't know. But anyway, so what I'm getting at is okay, is vegetarianism. You're on the raft. You already believe in cannibalism. We're going to call the plant study a pseudoscience, and so it's not worth a damn. And you could, I mean, let's say you got a hatchet there. Let's say you got some anesthetic there. I mean, I guess I could just keep painting this big picture of what you got to allow different variabilities. And so you could cut off your own arm and give yourself some anesthesia so you wouldn't feel it, and you could cut off your own arm and eat it. You could give your neighbor a bunch of anesthesia, put him out so you could kill him and eat him. You could do that with the dog, right? So, there's this idea of survival, or you can give yourself up and say, well, I'm going to die. So in your back pocket at any time, you could say, I'm going to die, right? Eventually. So why not? It's a good day to die. Why not just die instead of breaking my morals, right? Now, like I would hope to think that if I was that if I was in that situation and I was just in a canoe with my brother, that I wouldn't eat him, to stay alive. But I would also consider the idea of maybe saying, whoever dies first, let's let the other one eat them, if we want to stay alive, right? Well, these are extreme cases, and so then the whole vegetarian argument, well, look, we don't need to do it anymore, just like circumcision, for whatever the reason, if it's health or if it's punishment or what, we don't need to do it anymore, right? Okay, and then there's the tradition. Well, it's done, right? It's culturally done. It's like, this is the tradition manifest. It's the platform that's inherited. It's kind of like science. It's kind of the notion that you look at the world as a sphere and not as a spiral. That you name it as an object and you don't separate and say, because the atmosphere is a gradient into space and it goes out for, so many miles, and even though it appears as if it's only 3 miles, it goes out 7 miles. Oh, well, we're not really counting the atmosphere. We're just counting the terrestrial Earth. That's the limit, damn it, not the atmosphere. That's what we're calling Earth, right? The sun isn't the expression, it's the ball. It's like, it's this notion of where one is once again making demarcation. Oh, now I'm talking about the inherited structures, right? Okay, so there's a tradition of food killing, and then there's different reasons for vegetarianism, right? Like, they don't, like, I personally was a vegetarian and a vegan for long periods of time, and then my diet became out of my hands, over the last year in very significant ways. And I could have whined and bitched and griped and put forth an ideology, but I had other things on my mind than trying to maintain the ideology, right? And so there's this notion of maintaining an ideology, right? And I've bitched about being circumcised and think it's a bad practice and so forth. And so basically, how much do you want to uphold the rightness? Well, your argument is suffering, right? Suffering. And so once again, I'll say, well, we're back on the raft again. And you have the anesthesia, and let's say that the dog that you don't know and the neighbor that you do know, and you have lived good quality lives, and you got anesthesia there, so if someone's going to die, you can just put them out, and there's not going to be any pain, right? Shut down the pain and then off them, right? Because a lot of my philosophy also about eating meat, and when I say, oh, I eat it when it's served, has to do with the fact, like, well, it's already dead, right? And the notion of, okay, it's a consumable, it's already dead, it's present, right? So I'm going to partake in it, right? And a lot of people are like, then you're just adding to the whole problem, right? You're adding to the supply and demand, and therefore you're helping the continuance of this, and this is a problem. And I happen to agree with that. But if I use that same argument about oil, right, and said, well, Gary, I'm sorry, there's oil components in your computer and in your house and in the the plastic. If you got rid of every oil product, every plastic product, if you got rid of driving and your gasoline because you weren't part of that continuum, right? Then, and my point is about you're adding to the oil industry, so you're not subtracting from it. It's like buying stock in Exxon. You don't want to buy stock in Exxon because you're adding to the oil industry. Well, you're also doing it, if you want to take the gradient and step back and say, well, I'm adding to it by using a plastic pen or by using plastic components in my keyboard or in my clothes or blah blah blah. Then you're adding to it, right? And so this is what I meant by I'm conscious of where meat comes from, and this is when I come up with my ethic. If I could do it, I think all kids should go to slaughterhouses and see where the meat comes from, first of all, as an education. If I thought something was ideal in terms of meat, you would have to hunt for it, right? You would have to watch the death process and the suffering if you wanted to eat meat. And a lot of, the whole idea of, okay, maybe we don't need it now, but other cultures, they have a tradition of hunting also. I know hunters that hunt currently, there's the urban and the rural mentalities that separate in terms of value of hunting. And then finding a particular type of meat, a type of venison, right? The notion of identification, eating the power of another animal. A lot of cannibalism, as you say, there's cannibalism is about eating your own people when they die, So you subsume their soul, you gather their soul, and then eating your enemies so that they have power. You have power, they have power that you acquire, right? And you're like, oh, well, that's all just mythic horseshit, right? Okay, well, these are still traditions that permeate either through memes or through practices that come down. And so a lot of people that take on a virtuous Western philosophy, I mean, the West, we were 100 years old from, conquering the West, right? 100 years. So people went out to kill animals to provide this food for their families. They didn't have like a soy shake they could go pick up. They didn't know what the components of the proteins were. Oh, we can get a full protein out of rice and beans, right? They didn't know that. As a matter of fact, my condition requires a certain protein intake that is not uh, it's not considered cheap by the state to acquire it, and its equivalent is found in the acquisition of meat, right? But that's something else I guess I could go into if anyone has any particular questions about that. Anyway, and so the notion of flag bearing, I'm going to place a flag out and call it suffering, right? Which is the Buddhist religion, a lot of religion, life is suffering. It is the case. You're saying life is cannibalism. Well, they're saying life is suffering. You're like, well, then we're going to put an end to it. Let's not kill ourselves like we're on the lifeboat like we have to, but let's not cause any more while we're here, and then when we die, let's just stop the reproduction, stop the gene, because then, therefore, we end suffering. Well, if life equates to suffering, if it is true, right, if we're going to maintain truth, life is, big I-S, suffering, okay, and we want to end suffering, then we end life, and then you propose a mechanism, right? Well, other people, so you propose cannibalism, suffering, ending suffering. Life is cannibalism, life is suffering. We're going to end these things. So the whole idea is eating, right? Well, if it's cannibalism or bacteria, I'm killing plenty of bacteria, but we're going to say, kind of like the tree, it's a pseudoscience. It doesn't have these sensations. I bring up the earthworm because the earthworm has fewer, it wiggles harder than the leech when you're killing it, at least I think, and yet it has less neurological ends, where the leech has multiple brains, more than us, per its square mass. This one has less. Fish have less pain receptors in their skin, so people justify killing fish more because the fish, although suffering, is not suffering as much, and we know that because it doesn't have as many pain receptors in its skin, right? These types of arguments. It's like, this is what I meant by we can make a gradation. If you want to grade it all the way into plants, all the way into saying, well, do we have to kill the plant? Is the plant suffering? If we want to move it into a pseudoscience, or are we going to go into the fruitarian? Are we going to pick up the fruit off the tree? We're going to let it land on the ground. Like you said, oh, well, I don't want to offend you with your time, but hey, man, the whole thing's a gradient. I'm trying to break it down for you. I'm trying to parse it up. Well, I've got time to parse it up, right? So anyway, you made this video where you're just chopping this kid about, like, because it was about my dog, or he was arguing, it's my dog, and it's my life, and it's my property, and you kept pointing out how his value system is based from a central notion of property and a central notion of self, as opposed to an empathy for a sentient other. Well, I'm arguing that, first of all, the notion of the sentient other is a demarcation line that you've made, where you might value the dog over the prairie dog, and the prairie dog over the chicken, and the chicken over the worm, and you might justify all of their cannibalistic activities, right? And the bacteria over everything and under everything at the same time, right? How do you want to parse it? How do you want to dissect it? So what I'm suggesting is this. It's almost like, look, I don't want, it kind of, you get people trying to figure out where they are on this gradient. You got a lot of people that say, well, look, we've domesticated chickens, right? If you have a pet, you have cats, and you might be upset if they ran away. You might even bring them indoors against their will if you know a storm's coming or whatnot, or whatnot. There might be some sort of influence, what I'm getting at is this, is that there's some control humans have over animals and what we call domesticated animals, and we have a history of eating them and so forth. And so this whole idea of, well, I don't want the chicken to suffer. Okay, so you raise a chicken not in a pen, you raise it on a farm, right? And Conference Report had a great response to that, but I'm not going into that. Anyway, the whole point is this. Quality of life. Then you argue for quality of life and a quick death, right? So you're back on the raft again. Quality of life, quick death. You eat the apple because you're a vegetarian. You're going to hold up the flag of righteousness and let the dog eat the chicken, and then let the neighbor get upset because he wanted the chicken, and so he starts to kill the dog, and you get pissed off because you're holding up the flag of right. Well, he wants to eat, so he clunks you over the head and causes suffering, and you guys get in a fight, and you cause suffering. So you come to an agreement that he's going to kill the dog with the anesthesia, and then he'll eat the dog, and then you guys come to an agreement that when one of you dies, you can either eat him or he can eat you, but you hold up the flag of righteousness and say, no, I'm not a cannibal. After I'm done with this apple, I'm just done eating. I don't eat meat, right? And so it plays out however it's going to play out. Okay, and so what I'm getting at is this, is that as a meme, as trying to conquer a tradition like stopping people from eating meat worldwide, I think is going to need to be, it would be a manner of stopping manufacturing. It's already hard enough to get people to rally and go against the banks or the government or try to find some sort of justice. And I don't believe justice is real. There's a separation between truth and justice, right? Because if somebody has no eyes and they pluck somebody else's eye out and they don't have an eye, how are they going to pay him back? Oh, well, that eye was worth $10,000. No, it was worth $20,000. Oh, there's a difference between 20,000 and 10,000. I can't do the eye for an eye. Wait a second, I killed your cat, but I don't have a cat, so you can't kill my cat. What's the justice there? It's like a speeding ticket. Oh, you sped 10 over. That's worth $60. Oh, it's 20. That's 100. These notions of justice. Oh, wait, are you sure it's not worth $99? I mean, how do you know? How do you quantify justice? And you can't. So there's a disparity between justice is equivalence and justice which is served, which is authority laid down. And so what is the punishment for people that eat meat, right? What's the punishment? What is it you're trying to do? Well, you just want to put out the identity, the meme, right? The same reason I became vegetarian when I was. For all sorts of reasons. There's multiple reasons, right? And if you want to pound your fist and be monkey and say there's these other ones and this is right and hold up the flag of right, again, then do it. If you want to get into the argument aspect of this, realize that you probably aren't going to think of an angle that I haven't thought about. You've already expressed so many. So, I mean, and I really appreciate you just sitting down on your couch and talking, right? It really felt like damn good, Hopefully I'm not the product of you replaying my video because, once again, you have made either you've justified it upon some authority, a partitioning of what you agree to be right and correct as far as whether or not you can reproduce anyone else's voice or anyone else's image. And quite frankly, I'll let you know, I like to privatize my videos, and I don't like them embedded by other people, and I don't like them replayed, and I don't like them mirrored. Okay, so I'll let you know, if you respect me, you won't replay my video and go through it. You'll take my arguments as they will, and you'll just have a discussion with me. Now, if you violate that, I'll just realize that, to me, right, you and me, that you're being a dick, right? Because I'm asking you not to do that. But if you're just going to go ahead and take that away and then justify it on some legal structure, parse the law, parse justice, parse things the way that you will, because it suits your needs and your conveniences, and you would like to do that with our particular relationship, then I'll say, go right ahead, because it'll be the last time that I engage you, right? Not to give you ultimatums, and sometimes I'm mutable and change my mind and come back and forth and do all sorts of things, but I'll just let you know that's where I stand. Okay, so anyway, let me try to figure this out. My goal is not to inflict pain on animals. There's not enjoyment in that. I experimented with pain on myself, with seeing other pain. I've inflicted pain without trying to inflict pain. I mean, I'm no Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm not a masochist outward. The goal is not to do that. There's the tradition that I've inherited. There's the knowledge. There's the notion. It's how it is I'm engaging in it. It's my public that I'm around. It's the source of my diet, right? But other people. And other people do have the sense of what am I close to? What is in proximity? Their value system is based on proximity. And so what I'm saying is that, since you're holding up the banner of right and truth and so forth, and you're waiting for your life to end, and yet you're trying to find value in it, and you're adjusting your values and your sets, and you're trying to become more than you have been, like so many people are, and you realize that you've helped so many people out, and done the right thing historically, no one's denying that. No one's taking that away from you. And as a matter of fact, I want people to feel like where it is they've come from is really justified in their own being. That if they're somehow not measured up to somebody's satisfaction or their own notion of what they're satisfied in, then so be it. Work on it. Do what you must. I mean, dissatisfaction is, I assume, part of the suffering that comes along with humanity, that comes along with this definition, right? And, Charlie Sheen, man, he's a rich wreck, man. I wouldn't trade lives with any guy like that at all. And I don't think I'd trade lives with anyone, and I'm not particularly ultimately satisfied with my own. But anyway, okay, so suffering, on the extreme end, it's like, why not eat your own kids? Well, animals will eat their own kids, and there's plenty of cannibalism that goes on, and we see it in the animal kingdom, and humans have killed and drowned their own kids and not wanted to support them and not wanted to nurture them, and you might not want kids because you don't want to perpetuate suffering or nurture them, although I may say your whole attitude towards things might be a lot different. If you happen to meet one of these fine lassies and have her over and she happened to be pregnant and called you up on the phone and let you know, and you went to protect and your child seemed as if it was starving, you might even change your mind about vegetarianism. Maybe not. I've met people that were raised their whole lives in their mid-20s, they're completely vegan. Okay, here's another point. Veganism, I'm almost more against eating cheese and ice cream and eggs than I am about eating the meat and the flesh, because the process of getting these things from these animals reduces the quality of life. But when they're dead, we're not talking about quality of life anymore. They're just dead meat. It's the product, right? So that's the whole idea, is if it's going to happen, and it is happening, and it's happening on an industrialized level, it's like it's ramping up, it's getting worse. There's going to be greater farms, more suffering put in place to meet the needs, the human needs, or the human demand. I won't say needs. And so that's the whole idea, is what do you want to do? I mean, and my whole point is you can sit there and bitch and whine and be this YouTube guy, but I mean, are you really going to step up to the plate and go do something about it? I'm not saying monkey wrench game, but I'm not saying monkey wrench game. It's like all these people bitching about economics, but they're too afraid to say, oh, well, what we need to really do is go kidnap these bankers, or we need to group and protest actively. And if the protest goes violent, then go violent, right? It's like everyone's like, well, we know how it's done and we know our influence and we can trust it, but what are they going to do about it? So what are you doing about it? You're just being a mouthpiece. Another person just being the mouthpiece, and you're doing your own thing. Well, everyone's doing their own thing based on their own paradigm of truth and right and justice and so forth, right? And so if you don't like some people's answers, right, the argument of, well, what's the carnivore rationality? Oh, I like it, and I've inherited a tradition. Oh, I also like to speak, and I've inherited a tradition of that. Well, wait a second, speaking doesn't cause suffering. Oh, well, doesn't it? And don't we know that there are such a thing as psychological suffering? Okay, but, well, we're not going to count that. We're just going to talk, neurological suffering. Well, then let's talk about, that kid you balled out, is he going to go take it out on someone else? Is there going to be a cycle of abuse, Then we just argue, the whole argument changes gears there. Anyway, if you have any other questions, more specifically, maybe you can help lead me, because I think these are only an hour long. Maybe I'll just speed this up a little bit so I can fit it into the hour, because I only have about 2 minutes left. But yeah, if you have specific questions about levels of being a carnivore, or reasons why people can be it, reasons why I eat now, ask them, I guess. It's weird just to hear you state this is the case, that the world is a vampire. It's a cannibal, and then want to hold back away from the process of being a cannibal. I can't tell you how many bacteria I've killed. I can't tell you how much demand for meat my prelingual and lingual being has added to humanity, either through the process of my parents feeding it to me, or the process of me going to acquire it myself. I'll tell you about my hunting history, I guess. Tell you about, what sucks. Tell you about how far people separate themselves from the process of death, and yet they still, kind of like partaking in oil, they still partake in the supply and the demand of death. I think these are really interesting topics, and I'll settle where I settle. Meaning I'll do what I do, regardless. But if you're trying to have a discussion on this, that's another thing. If you're trying to suck me into your uniform platform, well, good luck. I may go. You might see me on the same plane, or view me as being there. Kind of like religion. I don't know how uniform I'm going to become to it. I don't know how uniform I'm going to become.